let's move on to Paul George. Podcast P spilled some tea today. That rhymes.
That was great. I listened to that on the way in. It was phenomenal.
And his podcast, right? So let's take it, I guess, a step at a time. He's not on the Clippers now. Why? Why?
Look, Paul George on his podcast gave one side of the story, right? Like, yes. The Clippers have not confirmed anything that he said, but there's reason to believe that Paul George is telling the truth. I'm not sure why he would brazenly lie at this point. What he said was, last October, he was offered a 2-year, $60 million extension that he deemed, I forget the word he used, insulting, just not the right. Not the right kind of offer. When Kawhi Leonard signed his 3-year, $150 million extension in, I think it was January, February, Paul George said, I would have taken that deal, that exact same deal, if it was offered. The Clippers, according to Paul George, never offered it. When he got to the offseason, and Paul came off a great season, 74 games, 20-something points per game. His efficiency numbers were terrific. He was as valuable in this past week when he hit free agency as he's ever been in his career. He says the Clippers came and offered 3 years, $150, but given that Paul George now had some leverage because he knew Philadelphia was sitting out there, he said, okay, I'll take the 3 years, $150, but you have to throw a no trade clause in. The Clippers said no. He said, okay, give me 4 years at $212, the same deal that the 76ers were offering. Clippers said no. So
why did they say no?
Well, the Clippers have been, we talked about the aprons just a moment ago with the Lakers. The Clippers have been watching that as well, and they have got some big contracts on their books. Kawhi just signed a big deal, and if they had signed Paul George in the coming years, they would have been deep into that first or second apron. So they wanted to be able to increase their flexibility. So they wanted to try to get Paul at something of a discount. Paul wasn't having it. And look, sometimes you roll the dice in these situations. Paul George, by turning down the extension in October, he could have gotten injured. He could have had a bad year, but he had a great year. And he had one team out there in Philadelphia that he knew was always going to be out there with that type of deal. So to me, it feels like the Clippers kind of blew this a little bit, because now they're stuck with a team that, as I look at the Western Conference, it feels like the Clippers are a play-in team, right? Like, and that might be best case scenario. I mean, Kawhi Leonard was having an MVP year last year before he got injured in the second half of the season. Right. But he always gets injured. James Harden, another year older. What can you expect from him? And now the talent around those guys is kind of, ish.
That's the thing I'm just stunned about, that we're talking aprons for a team owned by a guy who could probably, who's got the money if the fifth apron was, Saturn. Oh, right. I mean, so why would he, with opening a new building, and the Lakers are still the Lakers in this town, and the Clippers having an opportunity to hang on to somebody who, again, we're waiting for Paul George to have that playoff moment where he just puts you on the back and he starts dominating in a way. I'll be honest with you, like Luka, we did at times this playing playoff season. Anthony Edwards, I could go on and on. Jaylen Brown. We haven't really seen that from Paul George. Now you could sit here and say, well, that's not his role. That's not, that's not the team that he's been on or built. But we just, that's what somebody who wants to command $50 million a year. That said, he's your guy. Who else is out there? You're looking now into the abyss of being a play-in team. I'm stunned that they're like sitting here talking about, well, the apron would be this. For Ballmer, really? Aprons?
It's not the money, right? Like, Steve Ballmer is the richest owner in NBA history. Like,
he could be the richest owner in all of North American sports right now.
Incredible.
Throw everybody in the mix.
It is a question of, look, the NBA in its last two collective bargaining agreements has done a fantastic job of legislating these big spenders out. The last 6 years, there have been 6 different NBA champions. And that is partly due to the fact that the NBA is not allowing teams just to spend their way to success. And it's not just the Clippers that are facing this. Look at the Denver Nuggets. The last couple of years, how many veterans have the Denver Nuggets lost because they don't want to spend into these aprons? You had 2 years ago, you had Bruce Brown, you had Jeff Green. This past year, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, he goes and signs with Orlando. Every team in the league is faced with these specific type of issues. The Clippers, they can obviously afford Paul George. And you make a good point. They want to have as talented a roster as possible going into this new building down the street. Right. But if you start spending all that money all of a sudden you start hamstringing your ability to make other deals that can build a kind of winner around your team. Now, I'm saying that, but I'm agreeing with you. They should have spent the money. They should have offered Paul George the exact same contract they offered Kawhi Leonard back in January. And if it came to it this summer, they should have said, fine, 4 years, $212, we'll deal with the fallout later. Because by doing that, at the very least, you'd keep that window open for Paul George and Kawhi Leonard to win a championship. Now, It is closed and probably closed forever.
Chris Mannix here on the Rich Eisen Show. What about the idea that the Warriors were going to acquire Paul George? What? I mean, he mentioned that on his podcast today. What reporting might you have on that front?
Yeah, this was something that was discussed at length over the last week or so. Once it became clear that Paul George and the Clippers were not going to get on the same page, the Warriors made a very aggressive push to get Paul George via sign and trade. They couldn't sign him outright. They don't have the cap flexibility. They made some offers. They've got Andrew Wiggins' contract that could make it worth. They got some good young players. Jonathan Kuminga, I think, was the most appealing one.
He was offered
to the Clippers. I don't know that he was offered. I think that he's the one guy in that Warriors mix that they want to hold on to. Understandably so.
Yeah.
He's kind of got all-star written all over him. But ultimately, they couldn't come to an agreement. And you heard on Paul's podcast, he was disappointed by that. Like, Paul is a West Coast guy. Yeah, he played in Indiana. He played in Oklahoma City. He re-signed in Oklahoma City. But he is a Palmdale, California, Southern California guy. If at all possible, he wanted to find a way to stay on the West Coast. That's why the Warriors were his preferred destination. But once it became clear that the Clippers just weren't going to accept any of the stuff that Golden State was offering, again, he knew Philadelphia was out there. Philadelphia has one shot at spending all this money, one chance to blow through that $50 million. They are the Brewster's Millions of NBA teams, just out there trying to spend what they had to spend. And Paul George ultimately, even though he probably, you can say with certainty, Philadelphia wasn't his first choice, he ultimately wound up signing there.
Catch the Rich Eisen Show every single day on the Roku channel, 12 to 3 Eastern, for free.